Welcome, friends. Grab your favorite cup of tea, coffee, or cocoa and settle in for Sips from the Sip from the Utica Institute Museum. Sips from the Sip is all about sharing the history of little-known people and places in Mississippi. We're serving up truth, justice, with a dollop of sass. I'm your host, Jean Green. Today's episode is the 35th of a multi-part series of readings and discussions from the book, Black Man's Burden. William Henry Holtzclaw was born in 1874 and raised in rural Randolph County, Alabama, to sharecropping parents. The Tuskegee graduate founded the Utica Normal and Industrial Institute for the training of colored young men and women in Utica, Mississippi in 1903, making it the first little Tuskegee to be established in Mississippi. The Black Man's Burden, the autobiography of William Holtzclaw, published in 1915, made him one of the first black men to publish a book in Mississippi. Chapter 18 covers Holtzclaw's account of the situation of the races in his area as well as his correspondence to government officials. For many years, the Southern people living in one of the richest sections of our country did not develop their agricultural interests as the farmers in the Middle West and other sections have done. But in recent years, the entire South has been waking up in this respect. All at once, it has seemed to realize what it has been losing. Consequently, it is now showing an interest in the development of its agricultural resources that is hardly equal to anywhere else in the country. But the greater part of the interest thus far shown has been largely for the benefit of white farmers. Especially has this been true of whatever funds have been expended in the interest of agricultural education. So far as I have been able to determine, there has been no particular disposition to deprive the Negro of any agricultural rights and privileges, but the deprivation came through neglect. The legislators and public servants in various places seemed all at once to realize how much the South has been losing by not giving sufficient attention to agriculture, and they began to try to remedy that evil all in one stroke. In these rapid improvements, the interest of the Negro is too often entirely overlooked. For instance, in a recent meeting of the legislature of Mississippi, a law was enacted making it possible to establish agricultural high schools in every county in the states, but for whites only. This law was unconstitutional, as under the Reconstruction Constitution, white and colored men were to receive like treatment. I thought that older and more experienced men in the state would take the lead in such matters, but no one came forward. Meanwhile, the schools for whites only were being established here and there in various counties, and all the people, both white and black, were being taxed for their support. I had watched all this very carefully and had been trying to find some way by which this neglect of the Negro could be brought to the attention of the proper authorities. But as the white people of my own county had not attempted to establish such a school, I had no direct way of reaching the matter. At length, in one of the counties, a Negro refused to pay his taxes. A suit was brought, and the case soon reached the Supreme Court of the state, where the school law was declared unconstitutional. So those counties that had established schools had to cease operations. Then the legislature met again, and the air was full of rumors to the effect that a way would be found within the law to continue the establishment of these white schools without making similar provisions for Negroes. But the majority of the white people of the state did not sympathize with these rumors. With a sincere wish to see the white schools continued, but with a still stronger desire to see the Negro youth of the state enjoy the same privilege, on January 1st, 1910, I addressed the following open letter in conjunction with and with the approval of leading white and colored men to the legislature on the subject. To the Honorable C.E. Franklin and the Honorable General Assembly of the State of Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. Sirs, at the meeting of the last General Assembly, a bill introduced by Senator Franklin establishing agricultural high schools in the state of Mississippi was introduced and favorably passed upon. It was afterward discovered that this bill inadvertently made provision for the establishment of agricultural high schools for whites only. The right-thinking masses of the people immediately concluded that this was an oversight, which was not intended by the author or sanctioned by public opinion. As soon, therefore, as the matter could be brought before the Supreme Court, the law was declared unconstitutional, in accordance with the will of the white people. Naturally, the black people of the state rejoiced at this finding, for it proved conclusively the opinion for which the better class of white people, as well as the better class of Negroes, have contended for many years, namely, that there is no desire on the part of the better class of white people in the state of Mississippi to lift themselves up by casting the Negroes down. But we now have further proof, although further proof is unnecessary, in the new agricultural bill, which I learned from the Jackson Daily News is now in the hands of Senator Franklin for introduction. We might as well look matters squarely in the face and speak the truth without reserve. It is the opinion in sections outside of the state of Mississippi that the Negroes in the state do not get a square deal from their white fellow citizens. That being excluded from the ballot and having no direct representation at the Capitol and being therefore compelled to take whatever is given them, they are, as a matter of fact, deprived of much that they by right ought to have. When I say this opinion is pretty general, I speak from experience gained from personal contact with individuals in many of the states from Mississippi. I think I may venture the assertion that the feeling is not so general among leading Negroes in Mississippi as it is among members of your own race in other states. But whatever may be the facts in the case, this new agricultural bill should be enough to remove any doubt from all sincere seekers after the truth. For although no Negro perhaps has had any influence whatever upon anyone who has had to do with the making of the present bill, its provisions, nevertheless, are such as to convince any right-thinking Negro that the best white people of the state have his interests at heart as well as their own. When the masses of the Negroes of this state were deprived of the ballot and representation, there were many honest men and women who felt that this was a direct blow at the Negro's liberty, and some even ventured to think that it was an effort to re-enslave them, in spite of the fact that the statesmen of that day fought hard to convince the public that they bore no ill will toward the black men, and would not re-enslave them if they could. Mississippi was not allowed at this time the benefit of the doubt as to her intentions as she stood before the bar of public opinion, and was held to be guilty of an effort to re-enslave, as it were, until she should prove herself innocent. But notwithstanding many indiscretions of certain types of politicians, I think you will agree with me that this bill, which I understand is brought into being by some of the best people of Mississippi, and which is to be introduced by Senator Franklin himself, one of the bravest of leaders, should be final proof that Mississippi is seeking the good of all her people, black as well as white, poor as well as rich. But what if, after being introduced, such a bill should fail to pass the legislature? I do not think I speak rashly when I say that the failure to enact such a measure as provided, simply because it provides agricultural education for all the people alike, would be almost a calamity. For many years thereafter, we should stand condemned before the bar of public opinion. It is for these reasons that I have ventured to address you on behalf of the Negroes of this state, to humbly beg your influence toward the enactment of this agricultural high school bill. Mississippi's great treasures are all buried beneath her rich soil. With 1 million Negroes untrained in the very methods which this bill seeks to provide, it would be impossible for her white citizens to extract this great treasure so long as they tried to carry this load of Negro ignorance. It would be a veritable millstone around their necks, a millstone that must remain until it has been loosed by such a measure as is now before us. I believe you will find it easy to excuse the liberty I may seem to assume in thus addressing you, when you remember that this means of petition is the only way my race has of making its wants known to you. The laws are made by you, my race having absolutely no voice in either the making or the administration of them. We cannot appeal from them, but must accept them, whatever we may think of them. It is for this reason that I appeal for your support of this latest measure, which has for its object the enlightenment of 1 million black citizens who are virtually at your mercy. Although we are not represented in your General Assembly, we are with you in every act, in every scheme you may devise for the enlightenment of our farmer classes and for the development of our state. Believing firmly as I do in your interest in all the people of the state of Mississippi, and believing that the interests of both whites and blacks are conserved in this bill, I again summon the courage to beg your support for the bill as lastly drawn. Very sincerely yours, William H. Holtzclaw, Principal, the Utica Normal and Industrial Institute, Utica, Mississippi. I do not know what effect this letter had, or indeed whether it had any effect at all, but I do know that a bill was passed within a few days authorizing the establishment of agricultural high schools in every county in the state for both Negroes and whites. In such efforts as this letter to the legislature represents, I have not worked alone, but in cooperation with many of the good white people who have been interested in my race, and also with many of the leading Negroes of the state, nearly all of whom are anxious about the progress of the Negro farmers of the state. So far as I know, very little progress has been made toward establishing such schools as I have just mentioned for colored people, but that is not the fault of the law. One other incident I may mention that will show how I've tried to help in other directions is in connection with the lynching evil. These efforts took various forms, one of them being the following letter, which I wrote to the governor of the state at the time, when lynching had grown to such an extent in various parts of the South that a mob of young Negroes had caught the spirit and had lynched one of our own race in the Mississippi Delta. The strange thing about it, so the papers reported, was that certain white people applauded these Negroes while they did the lynching. I felt this disgrace upon our state so keenly that I submitted the following letter to the governor. In these trying days for my race, when so many of them are being put to death without the semblance of a trial, and when our state is listed so prominently among the states that have recently suffered from the evils of lynch law, it is difficult for one deeply interested in it and in all that pertains to its progress, and that of the South generally, not to raise a voice of protest. News comes to us of persons lynched to the extent of 1 a day for 10 days, and to make it worse, 8 lynchings happened on the same day. I am greatly interested in this question because it is altogether likely that the lynching spirit, which has hitherto been shown by whites only, may take hold on the Negroes after a while and manifest itself in ways that will shock this nation. It is the spirit of lawlessness, the same spirit that swings up a poor, ignorant, degraded Negro in the South and riddles his body with bullets, is the identical spirit that dynamites a house in other sections and occasionally assassinates a high official. It is anarchy under present conditions in disguise, and anarchy is chaos. Committing more crimes cannot be a cure for crime. I appeal to you, my dear governor, not on behalf of those who have suffered so directly from mob violence, but on behalf of the law-abiding Negroes who, by suggestion, may in the end be led to follow this deplorable example of murder to satisfy some real or fancied injury. I appeal to you to use your great influence to check mob violence among us. Dispatches tell us that only the other day a mob of Negroes lynched one of their own race in Marigold while they were applauded by white men. It does not need a prophet to tell where such actions will ultimately lead. It is an easy step from lynching a Negro while being applauded by white men to murdering a white man while being applauded by Negroes. I take the same position in regard to this lynching by Negroes in Shelby that I take in regard to all lynchings, that it is absolutely unjustifiable under all circumstances in a civilized country. It is vain for civilized men to try to justify so barbarous a practice as that of taking human life without some process of law. Here in the South, white men make the laws, they interpret the laws, and they should enforce the law to the last letter, not override it. All the machinery of the government is in their hands. They can destroy or defend, and the black man can say nothing but look on, and it matters not what may be his opinion of the white man's sense of justice. Every time you make a law and fail to abide by it so long as it is on the statute books, you have done just that much to undermine the structure of civilized government. People who resort to mob violence as a cure for any evil overlook the fact that ignorance is at the bottom of every crime that provokes the mob spirit. A few hundreds of us realizing that fact are working day and night to wipe out ignorance and consequently crime from among us. We deplore the existence of crime among our people, but we have faith that it can be overcome by intelligent training in industry, morality, and Christianity. When every Negro is engaged in some useful and congenial occupation, crime will be reduced to the minimum. I beseech you, therefore, to open the schoolhouse door to every Negro child as much for the sake of the future of your own people as for mine. If you will lend your great influence to the work of helping us better the conditions of our people, I pledge you the hearty efforts of 10,000 educated Negroes in this state who will see to it, as far as they can, that crime is wiped out and that there shall neither be excuse nor occasion for the mob. I was born in the South, have lived here, and rendered whatever service I could towards its development and progress. I am deeply interested in all that pertains to its welfare. I would not speak or write a single word save for the purpose of helping it forward. And I am writing you this letter because I know that your influence in the state and throughout the country is great. And I feel that a word from you at this time would count tremendously in the direction of peace and prosperity in our beloved Southland. William H. Holtzclaw, Utica, Mississippi. It is probably not generally known outside of Mississippi that we have a class of white people here who are as much opposed to lynching and other forms of evil as are the people in any other state in the Union. The following letter, which I received from the governor of Mississippi, is to the point in this connection. Mr. William H. Holtzclaw, Utica, Mississippi. I am receipt of your letter of the 6th instant in reference to enforcement of law in opposition to lynch law and all forms of crime. In all of this, you have my most hearty concurrence. I have done and will continue to do everything in my power to contribute to the enforcement of law and to the punishment of all who offend. I do not know where the 8 lynchings occurred of which you write, nor had I before heard of the lynching of a Negro by Negroes at Marigold. I should be glad to receive some data on this point and will bring that and all other lynchings in this state to the attention of the courts with the view of having the offenders punished. I have everywhere said when speaking of the subject that the people are in a sad condition when they look upon laws as something to use when it suits them and to defy or evade when it does not suit them. for laws of every kind should be equally and impartially enforced against every offender, and all should receive equal protection of the laws. I have heard of the industrial work in which you are engaged, and am glad to know that you are also stressing the strict enforcement and observance of law. Yours truly, E.F. Noel, Governor. I may add here that this determination on the part of Governor Noel is typical of nearly every governor that Mississippi has had in the past 20 years or more. The white people who wish to see their state rid of this evil welcome help, if it has weight, even when it comes from Negroes. I sent the governor clippings from various papers telling of the Marigold lynching and received the following letter. Mr. William H. Holtzclaw, Principal, Utica, Mississippi. Sir, I am in receipt of your letter of the 19th. I will take up the matter with the officers and do what I can toward vindicating the law in regard to each of the cases you have mentioned, and I intended doing it before I heard from you as to the Chutney case. I have no information in regard to the other case except through you. E.F. Noel, Governor. In my efforts to help the people, I have always had the encouragement of the best white people, not only in Utica, but wherever I have been. It is the impression in many places that white people are not interested in the education of the Negro. This may be true in some respects, but it is not true enough to be made a sweeping statement. For I have observed that the white man in Mississippi wants to see education count for something tangible, and whenever he can see that education means something to his home, to his community, and to the progress of his state as well as to the Negro, he is usually found lending assistance to that sort of education. For instance, one day I was booked to deliver an address to the colored people at the little town of St. Elmo in Claiborne County, Mississippi, a county which has all its public schools come together annually for public exhibition, graduation exercises, and so on. The meetings were convened at different points in the county each year, and this year it was to be at St. Elmo. When my train rolled up to the station early in the morning, I was greatly surprised to see that the congregation up to that time was composed of the white people almost entirely. And what is more, these white people were very busy preparing the stage on which the Negro students were that day to receive their certificates of graduation. They were not only building a spacious stage with the lumber that they had furnished, but were decorating that stage with various decorations, including red, white, and blue, and a profusion of United States flags, which hung like a crimson cloud in the distance. I ventured to ask one white man, why was all this interest being manifested by the white people when the Negroes themselves seemed so disinterested? The answer was that the white people gained quite as much from these general gatherings as the Negroes, and for that reason the various towns were eager to have the gatherings. Whenever education, educators, and educational processes can produce something that white men want, they favor the education of the Negro just exactly as other men do. Thank you for tuning in for Sips from the Sip. Joining me next time to discuss Chapter 18 will be Brandon Forrester. Brandon is the national organizer for Internet Rights for Media Justice. The Utica Institute Museum is dedicated to expanding knowledge of the history of Utica Institute and its role in Southern Black education. This program is supported by donations from our listeners. If you enjoy learning about the history of William Holtzclaw, the Utica Institute, and Mississippi, consider donating. To support Sips from the Sip and all the work at the Utica Institute Museum, visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Utica Institute. Until next time, this has been Jean Green coming to you from the heart of the Sip.